You have been blessed by Christ. Now go forth and suck my dong.
And the thing is, I do believe there was talk about these things. I believe if we study history, the Confederates were able to shoot pterodactyls, back in the Civil War, and they spread these things out. Anybody can look it up online. Google can spread these things out. And this is a historical fact. So, they spread this thing out, and this got a huge wing. Well, pterodactyl they shot. So, of course, these things went around. Now, they went extinct, obviously, slowly, but surely. And so,
what I'm saying is Jesus rode a dinosaur to work. That's history. It's in the Bible. How to Train Your Dragon. And if you don't believe it, do your own research. Pull up Google. You'll find the picture, I promise. Oh my God. Thank you, John Gleason, Godless, in there for giving me this beautiful moment. Y'all remember when they tried to cancel Steven Spielberg for posing with an animatronic animal rights activist? Hit it from the back. Historical facts.
You might ask me, you're down here bailing on the rest of us because you don't want to process your grief and shame like a normal person. By drinking and mistreating strangers. No, it is you who must nibble on a cloaca or her asshole. Everyone knows what a cloaca is.
Back in the Civil War, and they spread these things out. Anybody can look it up online. They spread these things out. And this is a historical fact. So, they spread this thing out, and this got a huge win. Pterodactyl they shot. So, of course, these things went around. Now, they went extinct, obviously, slowly, but surely. And so,
Paul Bunyan was sharing some Funyuns with his pet velociraptor. Oh, you thought I was an ox? Roll back the clock. Let me knock the socks off. Historical facts.
You heard me. You a pervert or something? Okay.
What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Tonight is a continuation from last week. You don't have to go and watch last week's live stream, although I do highly suggest it because it covers like the front portion of this topic, which is where Simon, the presenter over on Today I Found Out, kind of goes into this whole argument from prestige or argument from authority, and then poisons the well on the topic of mythicism. And today we're going to be looking at what evidence he has. He supposedly has hard evidence that can prove that Jesus existed in history. He takes the same line as Dr. Bart Ehrman, saying that Jesus is one of the most well-attested persons in history. So we're going to look and see what kind of evidence he has. Does it actually stand up to scrutiny? And more importantly, source criticism. So, if you will... So, if you want to fuck around and find out what's the hard evidence that proves that Jesus existed, then please stay tuned. All right, so tonight we do have a full slate. We got Josephus stopping by. He managed to wake up enough to prepare for discussion tonight, doing a little TED talk of his. And so he's going to be doing that. But before we get to Josephus and the response video, we are going to be doing, Today I Learned. We're going to be doing comments and then, of course, the response video. So I hope you guys are ready for it. If you're new here, you can help us us donate to great causes on this channel by sending in a super chat or joining the Skeptic Mafia, which the Skeptic Mafia, we do have a Mafia hangout planned for this weekend, which that'll be Saturday at 3 p.m. If you're part of the Mafia, you will be getting a link on Saturday so that you can join me to hang out for a little bit. Got some exciting information to discuss with y'all, so I hope that you guys will join me for that. So that's tomorrow, 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern. Some other kind of
money. I can actually just make wine.
Some other fucking time for Pacific. I don't know if any of you are on Pacific time. But in any case, you can join the Skeptic Mafia. You can send in a super chat. You can watch our videos. You can comment. All of that helps us donate to great causes here on Godless Engineer. So we do have a couple of super chats. Like you saw Daniel send in a super chat. The first one is from... I believe this is from Tomato Zumi, whatever Zumi's name is right now. But this one is, there's one gender, it's mine, and you can't have it. And they say, sending in my tithe, hail Sagan, love ya, moi, and then a face. So there's, this is tomato icon. And then we got Daniel who says, David says, good night. David, I hope you have a great weekend there, bud. And, I hope you had an awesome week, like at school and stuff. And, I guess we'll see you next week, when we do this again. Jester, Lord of Fools says, sorry folks, the evidence doesn't include dong. Fuck. There's no Jesus dong in this? I heard a thing about fucking foreskin and how some woman wore the foreskin, but it was invisible and it gave her magical powers. Yep, that was a crazy woman one time. It's true. Look it up. Jesus foreskin, invisible ring woman.
That was that
Saint Crazy as fuck?
From Siena. What the fuck is her name?
From Siena?
She's from Siena.
Yeah, Saint Crazy as fuck from Siena. There you go.
Catherine? I can't remember. We read about it. We talked about her in Italy, remember?
I know.
Yeah.
That's where I got the information from, was, you telling me about it. Anyways, but in any case, we do have a lot of comments that I want to get through, but we also have some Today I Learned. Hope y'all ready for this.
You have been blessed by Christ. Now go forth and suck my dong.
This is very relevant to the comments section, but this will never be in tune, okay? Today I learned. I went a little bit too Texas with the. All right. Herbs. Anyways, if you've been watching my game streams, you know what that's about. Got to pick up all the herbs. Anyways, so first up on Today, I learned that the royalties for the Verve's Bittersweet Symphony now goes to songwriter Richard Ashcroft after Mick Jagger and Keith Richards finally agreed in 2019 to grant him authorship of the song and all future royalties it generates, which is pretty cool. I mean, I like that the Richard Ashcroft, the actual songwriter's getting royalties and everything like that. So that's pretty awesome to hear. Let's see. Next up on Today I Learned. So that was all for that Today I Learned. Sorry about that, guys. Next up on Today, I learned that as interactions increasingly take place online, people find information that confirms their existing beliefs, making them less willing to listen to alternatives. This exacerbates filter bubbles and explains why public debates become polarized as people become impervious to imposing arguments. And I have to say, I always watched debates because it presented both sides, not because like I was firmly on one side and I wanted to like root for that side. I'm always carefully considering both sides of a debate when I watch it. But this is an interesting little factoid here that online interactions, people are more likely to just find and stick with information that confirms their existing beliefs instead of like challenging their beliefs. And I get that that's just because of how open, the online interactions are and online information is. So like if you find something you don't like, you can always just find something else that you do like. And so that I feel like this is the danger of the crowd that's always, calling for unmitigated free speech and unmitigated shit, right? Of that nature. I feel like this is the danger of it because you end up providing a space where people can basically have like a buffet reality. Like you could just pick and choose what you want your reality to be, and then that's what it is, and you can stick with it. You never get challenged on anything. And so I'm a firm believer in like fact checking and providing good sources for information and stuff like that. So I know there's a bunch of historicists right now. They're just losing their brains. Like, he's saying this on a thing where he's supporting mythicism? What the fuck? But I feel like the historicists are in that particular bubble. Like, they don't want to actually engage with the most recent scholarship on stuff. So, I mean, I don't know. This is kind of it's getting into a weird situation here. But in any case, keep this in mind with your online interactions. Always challenge your pre-existing beliefs and only believe in things if they have good enough evidence, or if the evidence is good enough. Life lessons with G. I'll never be in tune. Next up on Today, I learned that an anonymous poster discovered a partial solution to a mathematical problem that hadn't been solved in over 25 years because they were trying to figure out the shortest way to watch every possible order of the first season of the anime The Melancholy of Haru Suzumiya. Finding weird shit in weird places. Okay, let's go. This was just kind of interesting in that, people, figure this shit out by accident. And I find that that's really interesting that these things just sort of, happen by accident kind of. So, anyways, a little factoid for you, that right there. All right. So, that's going to be it for Today I Learned. And like I said, we've got to really get into these comments because we've got like 12 of them. Not all of them are going to be all that extensive to talk about, so that's why there's 12. But we do have comments to get to. Let's sing some more out of tune shit real quick. Comments of the day. Prepare to facepalm yourself in the next week. Sorry, I had a little bit of a caught up there. All right, so I do have these kind of organized. I wanted to start off with comments from last week's video because we did have a number of comments that were mentioning a few things about last week's video, and I wanted to really cover them for the people that left those comments. Like this guy right here who says, "My dude, this was literally an elaborate April Fool's joke." Saying that it was posted on April 1st. So, I mean, I get it that, like, everybody's, like, always assume that it's a April Fool's joke if it's posted on April 1st. But, I mean, the things that Simon was saying in the very first first section that we were covering is all shit that historicists regularly say. So, there's like he had some funny bits in it, but I think that was more for comedic effect rather than it being an April Fool's joke or indicative of being an April Fool's joke. Also, like, I know Cameron Bertuzzi over there on Capturing Christianity for like April 1st and April Fool's stuff. He posts along with this guy who is an Lincolnist, or like a mythicist, but for Abraham Lincoln. And it's like a big dunk on mythicists, right? Saying how we're ridiculous and everything like that. Meanwhile, Cameron believes in a magical resurrecting Jew whose blood and body has to be consumed to rid an imaginary disease from your body. So, I mean, I don't know who he's trying to dunk on, but it's definitely not mythicists. He's just making himself look more ridiculous. In any case, I don't... Unless at the very end, Simon's like, April Fools, Jesus doesn't exist, I'm going to take it seriously. Like, everything that he's put in the video so far and what I've watched, because I've watched further on into it and I've listened to it, this is all stuff that historicists say. So regardless of whether he was meaning it to be an April Fool's joke, this is still relevant material because it's still things that historicists say. And then we also had comments that were like, wait, but Simon is an atheist. It's really weird in this particular discussion, like the discussion of whether or not Jesus exists. Because what you have are both atheists and religious people, and it's like, or Christians specifically, and it's like, you know, that crazy handshake meme from Predator, where it's got the dude with the red shirt, dude with the blue shirt, and they're like holding hands and everything like that. And so like in the end, it's like Jesus existed, and that's atheists and religious people at this point. Even some of the like the more fundamentalist people, like a lot I've heard from people directly told to me that it's like, you know, that you're arguing like fundamentalists, or that fundamentalists agree with you on this aspect of it. It's like, okay, fundamentalists also agree with you on most of the rest of the topic. I'm just saying that like this one particular aspect of it, like this is, they took it as prophecy, and like the fundamentalists are like, oh yes, it was prophecy. I'm like, no. Very specific wording here. They took it as prophecy. Not that it was prophecy and that it actually happened. They interpreted it as prophecy. And so there's a little bit of a distinction there, but it's really weird how atheists will combine with religious people in order to defend the historical nature of Jesus. And they do it with these horrible arguments. And so it's always really weird for me to, you know, see atheists stand so hard for a historical Jesus. It's just crazy. Next comes from TMM, or the Messianic Manic, I believe is what he goes by here on YouTube. Great channel, by the way. You definitely go and check out Messianic Manic. I think that's how you pronounce his channel. Y'all can correct me in the side chat if I got that wrong. But TMM says, to be fair to Simon, he reads scripts for a lot of channels, like at least 4 or 5, and I don't think he writes many, if any, of the things he says. Edit, I looked into how many channels with which he's involved, and I counted 9. So he's involved with a lot of channels. So, I mean, he's a presenter. He reads a script and he presents it to the audience. And I'm guessing that he does this for like 9 channels. I don't know if they're all his channels, but I know that the whole British accent thing really gets a lot of viewers, and like people listen for that particular reason because they like the British accent or whatever in the fuck. But yeah, so I mean, I'm not necessarily faulting Simon here for just reading a script, but at the same time, I would think that if somebody gave me a script to read and I read it and I didn't know what the fuck it was talking about, I think I would educate myself on it before I endorse the views that were in the script, you know? Or have some kind of like, I don't know, disclaimer or something like that if I was going to do it. But I mean, that's why I'm not a presenter generally. Like, I don't just present generic content, or I don't hire myself out to be a presenter, because whenever I record myself online, like here on my channel or anywhere else, I want it to be my word, like my thoughts, like what I agree with. And so because I'm presenting myself as, you know, a brand, like this beautiful mug right here is my brand. So, you know, I want to represent myself accurately. But so I'm not necessarily faulting Simon for just reading a script, but I feel like you should do the due diligence and actually understand what's in the script and whether or not you agree with it. And then this person said, "Hey man, stop going after the presenter personally. It makes you look like a dick, and it makes it harder to defend you when other presenters go after you personally. Just attack the argument." Now, the only point at which last week that we attacked him personally, I wouldn't say attacked. Casey has some strong opinions about his voice cadence, how he sounds, her ability to understand him, and everything like that. But I wanted to start off on a good foot, and I was like, he's got a glorious beard, and you know it's true, he does. So we weren't necessarily attacking him, and we weren't like going after him personally. It's just hard for Casey to understand him. That I understand you, honey. And I know it irritates you. So that has no bearing on the arguments that Simon presents. I'm just saying, like, she has a hard time. Got a couple of member chats here from people. It's not going to pop up on the screen, but I do want to read them. Love Simon's content, but he's admitted that what he reads goes through the eyes without sticking. Would be cool if he did a stream with you. Considering how large his channel is, I doubt that he would ever punch down this far, but, you know, I mean, I'd be cool to talk to him, but I sincerely doubt anybody knows, like anybody at the channels that he's on would even care about, you know, a channel like mine. But I appreciate the sentiment there, Mary. Jester says, for context, he was hired as a voice actor and only later did he start his own channels. Today I found out is one of two that I know he doesn't own. He is never the researcher, though, just for context. Thank you there, Jester. Well, like I said, I don't necessarily fault him for that, but the information that he's presenting is bad. And I don't, other than the very brief mention at the very beginning about his appearance or whatever, which we were trying to start off on a light-footed note, you know, the rest of it was attacking his content, like the content that he was reciting. And so, you know, I definitely want to echo something that Birdman here said, and that's just attack the argument. I think that it's important to focus on arguments instead of, you know, how people look or anything like that. So I didn't mean to give off that kind of impression. Obviously, this person heard that and was just immediately turned off by it, and, you know, that's fine. But I do focus on the arguments. KC asked me if I want her to explain to this person how much she cares. If you want to go and hunt down Birdman's comment on last week's live stream, feel free, honey, to tell him how much you don't give a fuck.
I don't give a fuck enough to not even respond.
Yeah.
I got nothing to say. Fuck off.
I got nothing to say. Fuck off, is what she said. All right, let's move on to the next comment. We're moving right through these. This guy is giving me unsolicited advice, to which I do not give 3 fucks for, or 2 fucks, or 1 fuck. Felt like
That's your attitude. That's that too much attitude.
that's that too much attitude, sounding like a belligerent Dr. Seuss over here. 1 fuck, 2 fuck, 3 fucks. I don't give any. Anyways, take it down a nudge, John. You ain't pulling it off. Too much attitude. You can't contain this attitude. I like how people always give me unsolicited advice about something, or unsolicited, whatever. Like, oh, hey, you're gaining too much weight. You need to lose some. It's like, what the fuck? Like, this is a video on how God doesn't exist, or, refuting evidence that he does exist. Why are you talking about my weight, kind of thing? There's been that, and there's been a lot of other things in the past that has been said. But unsolicited advice would just get a big chuckle from me, because I don't give a fuck about your advice. I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck. That's right, honey. I don't give a fuck. Oh, and then this ridiculous fucking comment from Rodney. I think Rodney was being a bit facetious here, but he says, "Godless engineer, can you please tune that ukulele?" No, I won't tune this fucking ukulele, because it's gonna stay this way. It's part of the bit. I do have a tuner. It's somewhere up in here, and I used to tune it because I was actually trying to learn how to play, and I was just like, fuck it, I'll just string and do whatever the fuck. I don't got time. But in any case, yeah, the ukulele's not getting tuned. Y'all can comment about tuning the ukulele all you want to, but it's not happening. Somebody subscribe to talk shit. Okay. So getting to some more serious comments here about, the evidence for Jesus, the historical evidence and whatnot. We got Patrick Woods here, who says, "I, for one, don't care whether Jesus existed or not." Pinkies out. But I find the arguments on both sides of the issue kind of petty and silly. The main issue will always be whether there was a Jew who was a divine being. And of course, that can be debunked 1,000 times over. So, let me get this straight. You don't care about what's true about history, like true history, real history. You don't care about what actually happened in history. You care about something that you have seen debunked thousands of times over. For why?
And that's what you should talk about. Shit that's been debunked 1,000 times over.
Not 99. I'd say 85% of the content on my channel and that I discuss are topics that have been debunked 1,000 times over. This is the one unique piece of content that, I'm one of the only creators out there that's actually supporting the position that I'm supporting and asking these questions that I'm asking. And so I just find it utterly fucking hilarious, Patrick Woods, 2213. Thanks for watching, by the way. I find it really funny that somebody's like, I don't care about the harder questions and what's true in history and learning new things that I didn't know before. No, I don't care about that. I want to hear the same shit repeated over and fucking over and fucking over, time and time again. I want to know whether magic is real. That's what I feel like people are saying when they say this. I don't care if he existed, but was he magical? That's not an interesting question. That's not that is obviously a ridiculous question. Was there a magical Jew in the 1st century that resurrected, and then when he consumed his flesh and blood, the imaginary disease called sin is washed away? Fuck no! Do you have evidence to support that? Oh, you have feelings, do you? Well, fuck your feelings on this particular matter, because I require empirical evidence in order to believe in something so fantastic and magical. I just don't get this sentiment. I know that the sentiment is popular in my comment section on occasion, but I just don't understand it. because it sounds boring as fuck. Next up is one of those hard questions, and that is Paul's existence been proven yet, though? What we know is that there was one author that wrote 7 epistles that are contained in the Bible. That one author identifies himself as Paul. And we've been able to analyze it, like do textual criticism on these 7 epistles and know that the same writer was writing them. And this writer identifies himself as Paul. Now, beyond all of that, how sure can we be of the historical veracity of the things that he wrote about? Like things that he did, like visiting Jerusalem, seeing Peter and all that. We could be about as sure about that as nearly anything else that's like testimony based in history. Unless we have a good reason to disbelieve it, then more than likely than not, we should probably take him at his word. So did a Paul exist? More than likely. But I mean, again, this is because we have documents that were written, multiple documents that were written, and they were, all written by the same person that goes by the same name in each document. And then we have later authors that try to copy that author and even name their, or claim to be that author later on. So it just kind of makes it seem like, yeah, more than likely Paul existed. And if you're out there thinking, well, Paul doesn't even exist, and if you're even going farther out there and saying that like Paul was actually Josephus or Paul was Pliny, I've heard both of those things before. I feel like you would need substantial amounts of evidence in order to prove it, not just like speculative connections between Paul and both of those authors or any other historian. I feel like you would need a little bit harder evidence in order to support that conclusion. It's fine to have that as a hypothesis, but I wouldn't state it as anything but like a hypothesis until you get like even mythicism is a hypothesis, and I agree that mythicism can be proven wrong, and maybe one day in the future it will be proved wrong, but right now it's not. Like the evidence doesn't refute the possibility of mythicism. In fact, it seems like the evidence supports mythicism way more than historicity, in my opinion. All right, so we just got like 4 left. This one's going to be a doozy a little bit. But I did want to discuss this one because this is also another thing that's generally brought up. Yeah, it is, but I'll get through it quick. There is no point to discussing this topic with atheists. No amount of proof will ever suffice. Well, that's just simply not true. Like I said before, I accept the existence of Paul because we have letters written by a guy named Paul. And so for all intents and purposes, this person that wrote all those letters was Paul. So I feel like if we had some similar evidence for Jesus, like not even that Jesus had to directly write the letters, just some independent source that attests to a wandering rabbi who gathered people, did miracles, and then was later crucified by the Romans. I feel like if we had independent testimony of that, I'd be perfectly fine with, accepting that Jesus existed as a person and that Christianity is based off of some bullshit that he said. I'd be perfectly fine with that. The problem is that we don't have that, and that's what we're going to discuss later on tonight. If they literally witness Christ dying and then getting up out of the grave, they will still say it wasn't true. No, I wouldn't say that it wasn't true. If we had actual eyewitnesses that wrote shit down and, we could verify, we could do source criticism and verify that they're independent witnesses and talked about Jesus getting up, we would probably lean on a more natural explanation and not think that, a Jew magically resurrected, but some other kind of situation happened. But we would accept that Jesus existed and that he, was seen after his supposed death. That kind of thing. So, I mean, you have to gauge your claims here, because it's just coming off as strawmanny bullshit right now in this comment from Maximus Wolf. Thank you, Maximus Wolf. I'm sure you're a true alpha there. If they had watched him cure the blind and raise Lazarus from the dead, they would still refuse to believe that it was anything but some kind of high-end magic trick. Well, as far as we know, blind people don't magically become not blind, like they're not magically able to see, and dead people stay dead. They don't magically resurrect. So yeah, we're going to go with a natural explanation for those things. We're not going to deny that those things happen, but we will say that, oh, this was an illusion. Like, this didn't actually happen in the way that it's described. That kind of thing. Because that's a natural explanation. It's going to be far more likely than the magical explanation, because magic doesn't fucking exist! Yeah? Okay. These people will never believe because God wounds their conscience to a degree that their pride cannot break or brook? Brook. Their pride cannot brook? Like, is that a word? Like, I thought a brook. We got Michael Dacino. Yeah, I have no idea what he's trying to say either. Michael Dacino says, we don't believe because evidence, like in this post, the Red Dragon in Allies, Melvin V. Mara. We don't believe because evidence, like in this post. Okay, thank you, Michael, for the 20 for the 20 super chat there. I'm not sure what that. I don't know if that's a book or what that is, but I appreciate your super chat there. I'm sure it's going to come through here in a second. So God hasn't wounded me at all. God doesn't exist, so you got to exist.
I don't know if y'all know this, but when you get to heaven, your moral actions are not judged. You're only judged for believing in me. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Michael, if you just want to, I don't know if you want to format it better and put it in the live chat there, but I'll try to look back here in a second and see if I can tell you. We don't believe because evidence, like in this post, does not exist. Hypotheticals are not evidence. Oh, okay. Yeah, I agree. Hypotheticals are not evidence. That's what this guy is presenting here, is hypotheticals. That's all there is to it. That's all there ever was to it. And the Bible makes this very clear. Knowing that Christ is God transcends the finite intellect. Big brain fucking energies going on right now. Living pterodactyl immumerants therefore squawk knee. Send a super chat saying, there's no point discussing it with Christians because no amount of evidence is needed for them. For fuck's sake, their archaeologist thinks rocks were on the Noah's Ark. Oh, I think rocks were Noah's Ark. Yeah, good point there. Knee. Let's see. Sorry. Miracles cannot be fathomed by the rational mind. That's why they are miracles. I feel like we can fathom miracles, like God did something in reality. It suspends reality for a moment, like the laws of reality, and God
Jesus loves the little children, maybe a little too much.
And God causes something to happen. Like, I don't see how this is beyond the rational mind or anything like that. Like, anyways, that's why they are miracles. You can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make him drink. These people want self-enclosure and radical self-reliance, meaninglessness and desolation. Leave them to it. So, what, radical self-reliance? Is that a thing? Like, can you be radically self-reliant? Like, I'm so mentally stable, I don't need your constant approval. Like, it's like, oh, okay, I'm a radical. Woo! I did used to skateboard when I was a kid, so maybe that was it. Anyways, I don't know. The rest of it was kind of, was nonsense, but, the whole thing of, well, we just can't reach them. We can't talk to them or anything like that. Like, I feel like that's just out there. Yeah. Thanks for your input. True, alpha male Maximus, wolf. Anyways. Okay. So, all right, here's another one. Now, this is getting into more of the comments either on the Carrier versus or Ehrman stream that I did, or it's on the Facebook page concerning the existence of Jesus. Quentin Van Boven sending in his weekly tithe. Forgive me for missing my past few times. We have been busy. Hey, that's cool, Quentin. I understand. Like, everybody's got shit going on in their lives. I mean, I was out for 2 weeks. I know I had shit like scheduled up on the channel and everything like that, but that's just because I was paranoid about the channel going without any content for 2 weeks. But in any case, here's John Pecos 5686, who says, "So you basically were a total pussy when you had Ehrman himself in front of you and couldn't utter a single sentence without stuttering. And then you brought the biggest hater of Ehrman in the known universe, the man who lives on the highway to hell. The man who lives and breathes to discredit Ehrman, and you opened up laughing while Carrier ridiculed him. Yep, that's a really brave and honest thing on your behalf. I'm pretty sure Ehrman could do the same thing to Carrier and you. If he was as petty as you and had so much free time to spare." So I don't feel like we were particularly disrespectful in that review. Right. KC hates Ehrman. Carrier doesn't. Neither Carrier or I hate Ehrman. I mean, I'm fine with Ehrman except for this one particular topic. In fact, I reference Ehrman several times in other topics concerning the historical nature of the Bible, the Gospels, and all that. Like, I feel like saying that we hate Ehrman is really importing a lot of strong emotions onto us that just simply aren't there. So there's that. Also, I feel like I've been, at least in the interviews that I've seen that Ehrman has been doing when he's trying to shill his courses or his lectures or his conference, like he was doing this past little bit, I feel like I have been the only one to actually push back against what he was saying, and he got visibly upset at the pushback. I feel like he was at least a little angry about it at times, and you could tell on his face that he was a little bothered by it. And so I mean, I definitely feel like calling me a quote total pussy in the way that this guy means it, I don't feel like that's a accurate description of my interview with Ehrman, because I obviously pushed back on him. Now, were there hundreds of things that I could have pushed back about? Yes. But in an interview with a very short time span, I don't have time to go into every single minute detail. So, and we would have been stuck on so many things before getting to the actual thing. Because ultimately in my interview, I was just looking, hey, what's the evidence for the crucifixion? And then he would give me what he thought was evidence. And I would say, well, that's not evidence because we have evidence that this motif existed prior to Jesus being crucified. So, I mean, that's not all that novel. And so that doesn't actually prove that, you know, it wasn't just made up. And I wasn't trying to make an argument that it was made up, because even Paul thinks that Jesus was crucified. It's just a difference in location. I was just trying to find out what is the evidence that he was actually crucified. And a lot of times you'll just get people that are like, well, the Jews wouldn't make this up. Oh, well, they made this bullshit up when Onias III died, and they identified Onias III as the Messiah, so they invented a suffering and dying Messiah interpretation of the suffering servant. They did it then. Why couldn't they have done it later on, even if no Jesus was around? So that was my point, like, in the entire thing. But in any case, thank you, John, for watching, but kindly fuck off with your bullshit rhetoric, because obviously you're not trying to be constructive in this comment, and I really just don't even give a fuck. I gave it enough fucks to be able to respond to your charges, but after this, I just don't give a fuck what else you say on my channel. Just unsubscribe or block me or something like that so I don't come up in your fucking feed. Final comment for tonight was actually left today on the Facebook page, which I've been posting a lot on the Facebook page. If you guys don't know, I started out on Facebook, facebook.com/Godless Engineering. You can go there and you can check it out. But anyways, here's Josh Hensley, who says, Mythicism is counterproductive and factually in error. And so I asked cordially, can you give me an example of how it's factually in error? And so Josh here says, which I've got to enlarge it because I can't, my eyesight's not that good. Because almost all modern scholarship agrees that a historical Jesus figure existed. Divorced from the divine claims, there are several non-Christian sources who reference the King of the Jews and the Christus, later corrected to Christus by later Christian monks, Josephus and Tacitus being the most commonly cited. Well, I have links down in the description that refute both Josephus, like both passages in Josephus and Tacitus. So if you want to go and see the full refutation of those sources as far as proving that Jesus existed in history, go down there and check those out. Now, as far as all modern scholarship agrees that a historical Jesus figure existed, this has to be done with an asterisk, because all modern scholarship is not done by like historians that are objectively looking at things. They're done by New Testament scholars who were trained at seminary schools and divinity schools and all this other shit. Now, that's not to say that there aren't scholars in that field that weren't trained at those particular places, but I would say that the bulk of people that are trained in that area and are looking at the question of the historicity of Jesus or historical information about Jesus, they are going to be Christians who were trained in a Christian environment. And this even goes for some of the non-Christian scholars out there like Bart Ehrman. I don't know if y'all know this, but Bart Ehrman was trained at a seminary school and a divinity school. So to me, it just seems like, oh, the religion is teaching people how to interpret the history of their religion. And so now you're going to use the products of those people that are teaching what the religion wants them to teach. And I get it that Bart Ehrman's an atheist and that he doesn't believe. Well, he's gone back and forth. He's gone back and forth between saying that he's an atheist and that he's an agnostic. So I'm not exactly sure where he lands right now. He's an atheist or an agnostic, either one. And the thing is that he doesn't believe in the historical resurrection of Jesus kind of thing. And I get that he's broken away a little bit from that, but he's still holding on to a little bit of it because he stands super hard for a historical Jesus, and I just don't understand it. But in any case, thank you, Josh Hensley, for your comments, and I hope that you will keep interacting on the page. Don't fuck off. Anyways, that's going to be it for the comments tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I did. I bet some of the commenters didn't. But we are about to head into the Josephus section, the shitty-ass science. Now, the shitty-ass science subreddit has shut down. So I don't have a lot of good stuff to work with now. So instead, I've managed to convince Josephus to actually not do exactly shitty ass science, but these are going to be like just social media posts that he's going to have to explain. So he's prepared for that. Don't let him bullshit you about it. And I guess I will go get him. So, hey, Josephus! I'll be right back.
Shitty ass science! Bring out the answers of science shit really wrong.
I'm getting up here. Fuck.
How you doing?
I'm doing alright. I mean, I can eat food, whereas GE can't. So, I'm just down there with a pizza in my bed and my blanket, and I'm just having a grand old fucking time.
Sure you are.
Yep, I am. Holy fucking shit. What the fuck is this? GE did not prepare me for this kind of bullshit tonight. Holy fuck. Whew, shit. He told me that the subreddit shut down, but goddamn, I didn't realize that he was going to be pulling fucking crazy out. Let's see. This is how a real president looks like. I mean, can y'all ever pull up a photo of Donald Trump with either a gun or a crucifix or shirtless? Also, I don't want to see that fucker shirtless because he does not look like that. Now, I'm supposed to explain something to y'all, so I'm going to explain that this is the MAGA derangement syndrome or whatever in the fuck. These people are so helplessly attached to this figure of Donald Trump that they've committed blasphemy, I tell you, because they are putting Donald Trump in the place of Jesus, and that'll get you sent to hell. I know, because I talked to God right before this, and he says, anybody that thinks Donald Trump's better than me gets sent to hell. And that's what God and Jesus, both of them were right there, and they told me about it, okay? And so they was like, Donald Trump is the devil. And so, I mean, these people are helplessly engaged in this devil worship by putting Donald Trump shirtless on a photo with a gun in one hand, a crucifix in another, and then a whole bunch of shirtless men around him cheering him on. Oh, yeah, there's a cross in his britches, too.
Crosses just floating in the sky.
Oh, and there's crosses floating in the sky. Holy shit, that's a lot of fucking crazy right there. What do you think is going on with the cross in his pants? Do you think he pulls that out and that's another 9mm? He's like, I will shoot you with the love of Jesus. I got my gun around here somewhere. Is it here? Hold on, let me go. I gotta go find it. Viva la Trump! Oh, the batteries are dead. Shit. Viva la Trump! Hey! This is just fucking crazy right here. All right, I need to put that away. That might hurt somebody. Anyway, I'm not gonna hurt anybody. Okay. So anyways, yes, this is a crazy person. MAGA derangement syndrome, that's what this is. This is how you can identify it. Living pterodactyl, therefore Squawkney says, I'm going to borrow G, I can borrow this, right? Yeah. It's G's. I don't really care. Anyways, it's a raining man. Hallelujah, it's a raining man. That's literally the sheet music to it, by the way. Yep, it is. All right, so Donald Trump has a gun in the air, a cross gun in his waistband. Luckily, he doesn't have to worry about it blowing off his dick. And then, holding up Jesus with a whole bunch of shirtless men around him. Oh, he is to be feared above all gods? Like, what in the fuck is this? I have no idea.
You have been blessed by Christ. Now go forth and suck my dong.
Say anything that you want about me personally, but I was dead on with the blasphemy part of this because I feel like this is definitely blasphemy. And I think Trump, he would definitely heart and everything on this motherfucker right here. Yeah, I'm awesome. I'm not taking my shirt off, though. And also, all you young men, put your shirts back on because, I don't, Donald Trump doesn't go that way right now. Anyways, so that's how you can identify MAGA derangement syndrome. They post ridiculous shit like this. They replace their own dogma with MAGA dogma, and they have Donald Trump holding a cross, praising Jesus, but also being put above all gods. That's MAGA derangement syndrome. There you go. That's going to be an official DSM classification right there, I believe. Anyways, I'm going to let y'all go. I'm going to let G get back on here. And, I guess I will see you heathens later. I know y'all got a lot of shit to talk about tonight, so I will let y'all go. Bye, heathens. Burn in hell, motherfuckers.
Shitty ass science! Bring in the answers of science shit really wrong.
I'm so glad that I'm able to participate and identify these MAGA idiots and how they're blaspheming the Holy Lord. Those fuckers. Fucking hate them. Have a good show, GE. And also, I'm going to be eating pizza, motherfucker. He's rude. Why has he got to be an asshole like all the time? Can we take his blanket tonight?
No. It gets cold at night now.
It gets cold at night now? Maybe he should have thought about that before he shit talked me. You know, it's kind of like the Republicans regretting shit talking the Democrats before they got their own party blew themselves up.
I don't think they regret it.
They don't regret it. Mathwiz sent a super chat saying, "Is that a crucifix in his britches, or is he just happy to see me?" Well, it's just the one in his britches doesn't have Jesus on it, so that's not a crucifix, so it's just a cross. But I fully believe that that's a fucking 9mm right there in his britches. I mean, he's got to do something to compensate for that toad of a dick. No? Okay.
I mean, I don't want to think about his penis.
You don't want to think about his dick, honey? Sunian says, GE, he called us bad words. I'm going to have to go kick his ass. He called them bad words?
He always calls them bad words.
That fucking asshole. Daniel M says there was one I saw.
Jesus loves the little children, maybe a little too much.
I'm having fun tonight. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Daniel M says there was one I saw on Facebook where Trump was being crucified. That's something that they've literally said, that Trump is being persecuted just like Jesus was, as far as
I don't know if y'all know this, but when you get to heaven, your moral actions are not judged. You're only judged for believing in me. Thank you.
Yep, that's actually a factual statement right there. All right, so that's going to be it for all of the preceding stuff tonight. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I know I did. But now we're going to be getting on into the video that I have not queued up yet, but I will queue up right now because I'm prepared.
Throughout history, speculative hypothesis.
Okay, so yep, we're starting right at about 7 minutes in. So get this pulled up over here, and then we'll switch. Booyah! Come on, there. Oh shit. See if we can get this. There we go. Okay, so if you guys don't remember, last time we had Simon that was talking about a whole bunch of New Testament scholars and textual critics that were affirming that Jesus existed in history by strawmanning mythicism as well as poisoning the well. And so that's pretty much a quick 5-second thing about last week. Quentin said, will this keep Jesus away from the little children? Someone needs to at the very least. Yeah, somebody definitely needs to keep Jesus away from the little children because he's shown too much concern for the little children. I know that's going to come through here in just a second, so I'm going to let that go before we start.
I don't know if y'all know this, but when you get to heaven, your moral actions are not judged. You're only judged for believing in me. Thank you.
Okay, so If you want to know more about any of the topics that we're going to be getting into tonight, as far as the evidence for Jesus, I have a number of them linked down below already. So if you find yourself like, well, what's the evidence for that? You can go down there and click that link. And I do believe that I have resources in those videos over on the Clips channel where you can find out more about it. So if there's at any point, if you want to query me about something, make me show you the evidence right here on stream, you send in a super chat and I will definitely do it. Let's see. Daniel M sent a member chat saying, okay, about the picture a little more. I got in a little late. Was all those dudes around Trump naked? They were at least shirtless. I don't know if they had pants on, but they were definitely like around him shirtless, probably hot and sweaty. And it was definitely like a sausage fest with no shirts. So that was rather disturbing. All right. So, I just got a notification that an ad was inserted. This is a new thing that YouTube has started. And I keep forgetting to figure out how to turn it off, but it will automatically insert ads. So if you got an ad, I'm so sorry about that. That was not my fault. I've got a button where I can hit it and I can insert an ad manually. I choose not to do that. Just so you guys know. But anyways, all right. So we're going to start here. He's going to be going into the evidence for Jesus existing, not just straw manning us. And here we go.
Brother carrion, and any final remains dumped in a common pit, end quote. Moving swiftly on from such speculative hypotheses, of which there are many levelled against the New Testament works to try to ascertain veracity of elements in them, Paul the Apostle's surviving works, considered to have been written around 50 to 60 AD, only about 20 or 30 years after Jesus' accepted death, mention meeting various people who knew Jesus personally, including a brother of Jesus's named James, as well as a couple of Jesus' apostles, including Peter, who Paul was a guest of for a couple of weeks in Jerusalem, not long after Paul's conversion.
So the contention I have here is, one, with James, the brother of the Lord, and two, the other apostles. What was the nature of these apostles? Were they people that knew Jesus personally? Did Paul say anything about questioning them about the historical nature of Jesus? It's an emphatic no to both. Did Jesus have a brother named James, as well as were these apostles eyewitnesses of Jesus? So let's start with the first one, and that's James, the brother of the Lord. Now I have a video down below about James, the brother of the Lord. If you want to look at the reasons why we don't consider him to be like a blood relative, it's all down there, but I'll give you a 5-minute spiel here, or just a quick summary of the counter argument to this. For one thing, the phrase is brother of the Lord, or the Lord's brother, however you want to put that. The thing about the phrase in general, just at face value, is that Jesus only became the Lord after he resurrected from the dead. So even if, he was talking about, not even if, he was definitely talking about somebody who had some kind of relation to Jesus after he resurrected from the dead. Otherwise, he would have just said the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ or something like that, or brother of the Lord in the flesh or something of that nature. He said that before in other places, but I feel like Paul wouldn't have called him Lord, because Lord is a celestial title. Like, it's a title for a divine being, the Lord. The Lord is not figured as being this fleshly person that historically walked on the earth. He's always pictured as this celestial figure that makes appearances on earth in the Old Testament. Now, so there's that part, but that part also coincides with the actual Greek words that Paul uses. The word that Paul uses for brother is adelphos. Now, the reason why this is a problem is because adelphos can be used to mean a fictive kinship or a blood relation. It seems to be more or less used for fictive kinship, at least in Paul's case. And the reason why that we can know this is that if we look at Paul's other uses of adelphos, we see that he regularly refers to brothers and sisters of the Lord, well, not of the Lord, but brothers and sisters who are in the same faith as him, using these same words that he uses in brother of the Lord. So it kind of seems like it would be a special pleading argument to say, well, in this one particular instance, well, not just this one instance, there's another instance that's brothers of the Lord, meaning multiple. But in these instances only does he mean that they are blood relation. And the thing about the second reference, which I think is Romans 9:5. Maybe, let me double check. No, it's not Romans 9:5. It's something 9:5. Yes, 1 Corinthians 9:5 is what it is. Do we not have the right to take along a believing wife, or sister is how it's actually literally translated, because they use the same word base, but just the feminine version of it for wife, meaning sister, as do the other apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Cephas, or Cephas. I don't know how you pronounce it. But the brothers of the Lord uses the same word as the believing wife portion. Later interpreters of the Bible and translators, they have changed it to mean different things, but it's the same word. It's just that they chose to provide a context to it in their translations. So there's that one, and it's really weird because there's no indication of a changing of meanings there. Like, there's no way to know what he's talking about. And it seems like for every other use of adelphos that Paul uses, he means a fictive kinship. So it's rather revealing of Paul's theology that he considers everybody a brother or sister of the Lord once they become baptized. He also identifies Jesus as being the firstborn of many brethren. And so Paul just has this very complicated family theology with the family of God. And he often will convolute his writings with this language, this familial language. Now, if you want to know more, I definitely suggest you hit up the James link that's down in the description, because I have a much more thorough explanation with evidence and sources and like comparisons in Paul's work down there. I go through all of that. So definitely go and check that out. Yeah, so there's that, and then there's, the apostles. That's the other thing that I got to handle. So it doesn't make any sense to me for anybody to argue that Paul received historical information from Peter, James, John, which this James is the James the Pillar, which is different from the brother of the Lord that was just mentioned. Those were not, like, he didn't confer with them about historical matters. He only conferred with them much later about theological matters concerning Jesus, never historical. And this is reinforced by earlier in Galatians 1, which is where this appears. Well, Galatians 2 is where he talks about, conversing with Peter and James and John. But in Galatians 1, he reinforces that he did not get his theology or his information about Jesus from any human person on earth. He got it directly from Jesus through revelations in Scripture. That's what he says. So he clearly separates himself from any kind of historical sourcing for his information about Jesus. So there's no way that Paul had historical information about Jesus as far as the evidence goes, because he never questioned anybody about the historical nature of it. In fact, this trend of not caring about the historical nature of Jesus continues from Paul's time all the way up until the 2nd century, when the early church fathers, when they were becoming convinced of Christianity, they didn't care about the historical nature. They just cared about the theological truths that it presents. And so that kind of gives you an idea of where their heads were at this early time in Christianity. even when the Gospels were written, these were more theological documents than they were historical documents. They presented theological ideas. They provided like a handbook for missionaries on how to preach these theological ideas to people. So even the Gospels are not trying to be historical accounts. They're trying to be theological handbooks.
Further, given these were written not long after Jesus' death and were accepted, it's apparent for this and many other reasons that nobody at the time questioned whether Jesus had existed, many of whom would have been alive when the alleged events occurred, with some of these events quite noteworthy in terms of stirring up trouble amongst Jewish and Roman higher-ups. On top of this...
Well, see, this isn't exactly all that true, because like in 2 Peter, we have evidence of them needing to provide an apologetic against people who were claiming they just believed in cleverly devised myths, right? And so, given this fact that it's in there in 2 Peter, it seems like there were people that were at the time saying, oh, this is just a myth, or that these are myths or whatnot. And then you also have the evidence of the early Christian fathers, or the church fathers, who had no concern for the historical nature of Jesus. Like, they didn't care whether or not he was historical. They just cared about the theological truth of it. So the fact that they were not concerned with the historicity of whatever stories they were being told should not inform us about whether or not people consider Jesus to be a purely celestial being, or to have only existed in the celestial, and never to have been a historical person. All that we can conclude is that they didn't care about it. And that's all that we can conclude about it. Now, it is kind of curious how this supposed historical figure didn't have anybody that was concerned with his historical nature, or didn't mention anything about his time here on earth. At least in any of the documents that aren't like obviously fabricated by anonymous authors. So it does make it weird. It is kind of odd, but more importantly, it doesn't help the historicist point. Like, none of this information helps the historicist point. I feel like it's harder for historicists to explain this. I'm not saying that it's impossible for them to explain, or that the historical hypothesis can't explain it. I'm just saying that it's a lot more strained of an explanation.
You have been blessed by Christ. Now go forth and suck my dong.
Whereas the mythicism hypothesis, the minimal mythicism hypothesis, it fits pretty nicely with it, and it's not as strained. So it has more explanatory power than the historical hypothesis there. We got Living Pterodactyl Immune, therefore Skrockney says, Trump, I prefer apostles that weren't martyred. Damn, that is what he would fucking say, isn't it?
Other evidence strongly suggests Christianity had already exploded in Judea and parts of the Roman Empire at the point Paul was writing. This is important because it would have taken some time for this relatively large spreading to occur. Further,
this is a theological point. Like, this is what fundamentalist apologists, and not just fundamentalists, but apologists in general, this is an apologetic point. This whole idea that Christianity exploded in popularity, it didn't. Like, it just simply did not. Like, if it had exploded in popularity, why is it that Pliny the Younger in the 2nd century had never heard of it? He had never heard of it. And even if it was like, even if it had exploded in, let's just say, Judea, like it was really popular in that hyper specific area. Pliny the Elder also didn't know about the Christians at the time, and he was living a lot closer to the time when it supposedly exploded. Now, I don't know what Simon is meaning by exploding relatively quickly. I don't know what kind of time frame he's working with here, but in any kind of reasonable time frame as far as quick goes, I would think that by the 2nd century, if it had exploded quick, you would have definitely people knowing about this Christian sect of Judaism, like these Christians. And like by the 2nd century, Pliny would have definitely known about these people because he was busy like keeping order in his area and forcing people to make tributes to the Roman gods and all this other stuff. So, and that's the context in which Pliny was persecuting the Christians in his little short thing. So I think the fact that Pliny doesn't even know who they are, doesn't know anything about their theology, saying that, oh, it exploded, I feel like is just going a bit far in this particular situation, because we just simply don't know that. We don't have any good information that shows that. In fact, when this is really telling, when Paul was writing this time that he's talking about, he goes to Jerusalem 2 times, and he explicitly lists off all of the Christians that he saw in Jerusalem. Now, this is in Jerusalem, mind you, right? He goes to Jerusalem, and he only finds like 3 or 4 fucks. Those are the only Christians he sees in Jerusalem. But yeah, tell me how this fucking religion exploded.
Significantly dwindling the couple of decades between when Jesus is referenced to have existed and when we know for sure a rather large group of people from the region believed he did. On this note, also important in all of this is nobody among the non-Christian Jews or Romans seems to have questioned Jesus existed either, even at this very early point when many alive should have been able to know definitively either way.
Again, another apologetic point. And I see there are some people in the chat that are making the point that, oh, he's just reading off a script. He really doesn't adhere to this. One thing, you don't know that. Okay, you don't know whether or not he actually adheres to this particular thing, unless you can link me a video or point me to a video where he specifically says, yeah, I read all that, but I don't believe it. Like, that's all hogwash. I don't think that Jesus existed in history. That kind of thing. Unless you can point me there, then I don't think that you can say he doesn't believe in this. I think that he may not have an opinion either way. You could probably more than likely say that, but you definitely can't make a concrete statement that's the totally opposite direction than what he's putting forth here. But also, I'm criticizing the content. Like, I'm criticizing the script that he's reading. I'm not criticizing Simon. I think that we need to divorce, this idea of Simon the person presenting this as his personal opinion and whatever the script writers wrote for today I found out. Because if he is truly just reading a script and he doesn't adhere to any of this, fine. I'm criticizing the script. The script says that this shit blew up, out of everywhere, and it's just simply not true. So the script is wrong and pushing apologetics, just like what he's saying here is apologetics. The whole idea that these people didn't question the historicity of Jesus, therefore he probably existed, is a bad argument, because you can't say that they obviously could have researched whether or not Jesus had existed. The information at that time was not as widely accessible as it is now, and also you're talking about people that couldn't even read documents. Like, they couldn't read in Greek or Aramaic. Like, the literacy at that time was so low. So, they couldn't read testimonies about him. They'd have to be told about him. And if I asked you to go to some city that you've never been in, or in your own city for that matter, and to find the dude that could magically pull beer out of his ass, if you couldn't find that dude, does that mean that dude doesn't exist? If you searching around asking everybody, hey, where's the dude that pulls Bud Light out of his ass, and you couldn't find him, does that necessarily mean he doesn't exist? It doesn't. It just means you couldn't find him. And I would say that there are other arguments that you could use to say, well, that guy doesn't exist. But the fact is that the argument that the argument that the script is using in this particular instance is the same thing as saying, hey, I can't find a guy that can magically produce beer out of his ass, therefore that guy doesn't exist. Now, while the conclusion may be correct due to other reasons, that is fallacious argument. That's not a sound argument to make, because that's not the only conclusion. One possible conclusion is that You just couldn't find them. Same thing with the people that could have easily researched whether or not Jesus was historical. But all of this is predicated on the idea that they fucking cared. They didn't fucking care. The church fathers in the 2nd century, they didn't fucking care. They didn't care whether or not Jesus was historical. They knew that Jesus' story was the exact same as the Roman and the Greek gods and all of these other religions out there that had magical beings as their center point. Like you've got who was it? Was it Ignatius of Antioch in the 2nd century maybe? I think he's the one that said that these, the things about Jesus, the things that we teach about Jesus are the same things that are taught about the sons of Zeus. Like, they literally say Jesus is the same thing as these Roman gods and demigods. And so they don't care whether or not it's historical. They just simply don't. And so this entire section being predicated on the idea that they cared is flawed. And so since he's building off of a base that's flawed, he can't come to any good conclusions. His conclusions are going to be flawed. The scriptwriter's conclusions, not necessarily Simon's, if that makes it any better for you.
And certainly, given all the trouble the Christians were causing the Jews and Romans at the time, the higher-ups here would have had quite the incentive to put forth any evidence that Jesus had not existed to shut up the Christians had he not. But that still all has some level of speculation tied to it, or is from a Christian source. So what about some...
I really don't care if it's from a Christian source as far as history goes. I mean, you still have to scrutinize it, and obviously if it says something like Jesus had a beer that grew wings out of his ass, you would not, take that seriously. But I feel like any historical mention of it, whether it was a Christian source or not, I feel like that could be good. Now, for instance, my problem with the Gospels isn't that they're Christian. Of course they're going to be Christian. Of course, the earliest people to write about this Jesus fuck are going to be Christian or religious of some kind. So that's not my issue, and it's not the issue with minimal mythicism. The issue is that the Gospels, they don't have any source citation. They don't have any indication of how they came about their information. And from textual criticism that we've been able to do on the Gospels, they all copied off each other, and Mark is based on Paul's work. So it all ultimately leads back to what Paul said, and Paul, being that he only knew information about Jesus through hallucinations or visions and scripture, that is what it's based on. So that's my problem with the Gospels. Not that they're Christian, just that they have dubious origins is what it is. And we just cannot tell where the information comes from other than a dude that, had visions of a resurrected Jesus.
Some sources that are, shall we say, slightly more independent. Do any such relatively contemporary sources exist? Well, if you've been following along so far and otherwise don't think historians are idiots, it turns out yes, two of which are generally considered quite definitive, at least with regards to the question of whether Jesus existed.
Okay, so let me see if I can predict the two that are definitive about Jesus existing. Typically, it's Josephus that's pointed out, and I'm going to say probably Tacitus. There's problems with both of these. For one thing, Josephus, he was writing in the 1st century, so that he's got that going for him. But the two verses or the two passages in that are later insertions. One maliciously inserted, the other was an accidental scribal interpolation, and then which we can get into here in a minute. And then Tacitus is a 2nd century historian who's writing about events in 64 CE and mentioned things that are also mentioned in the Gospels. By the 2nd century, the Gospels would have reached that area. So if he was looking to describe what the Christians believed, then he had a whole host of people to ask about. that. He could have heard it from the Gospels. He could have gotten it from the Gospels. More importantly, Tacitus could have gotten the information from Pliny the Younger, who was busy interrogating the Christians, who would have told Pliny. So, I mean, there's several different ways in which Tacitus could have come about the information, and it originate from the Gospels. But that's my guess. Josephus and Tacitus are the two things that I bet he's going to bring up.
For starters, enter an individual generally considered the greatest of all Roman historians, Senator Publius Cornelius Tacitus.
Booyah! Score! That's one. I'm 1 for 2 right now. Tacitus.
Who was born a couple of decades after Jesus' death.
We got Chester, Lord of Fools, who says, I told you I got drunk one weekend at God College, wrote a codex, and bam, Christianity. I mean, that sounds more believable than Christianity. No, I think that's pretty funny, but yeah.
Tacitus not only gives a direct reference to the particular Jesus in question, but interestingly, he also states that Jesus was crucified by Pilate. In his Annals, 115 AD, in chapter 44 of book 15, he discusses Christians being targeted as a scapegoat by Nero, stating, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations called Christians by the populace. Christus, for whom the name has its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our protectors, Pontius Pilate, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where
I don't
all
know
things...
if y'all know this, but when you get to heaven, your moral actions are not judged. You're only judged for believing in me. Thank you.
Hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. Accordingly, an arrest was made of all who pleaded guilty. Then, upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city as of hatred against mankind. Mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt to serve as a nightly illumination when daylight had expired. Nero offered his gardens for the spectacle and was exhibiting a show in the circus where he mingled with the people in the dress of a charioteer or stood aloft on a car. Hence, even for criminals who deserved extreme and exemplary punishment, there arose a feeling of compassion, for it was not, as it seemed, for the public good, but to glut one man's cruelty that they were being destroyed.
Okay, so yeah, he read the entire thing of Tacitus there. The problem with Tacitus, though, is that it only attests to Christians existing, not that Christ did exist, and he's definitely not independent. Now, the script in this particular instance says that these are independent accounts. This was not independent, or at least we can't verify its independence, because it's quite likely that Tacitus would have gotten his specific information about Christians from Pliny the Younger. As I stated before, they were pen pals. So could have gotten information that way. He could have also gotten information from just questioning Christians in his area about it, if he was able to find them. I think more likely, though, he would have gotten his information from Pliny the Younger. But the fact is that everything that Tacitus mentioned over there is found in the Gospels. And another thing that kind of makes it a little weird, this particular passage, is that it wasn't actually Christus to begin with. It was Christus. Like, both references were Christus. Christus, for whom this movement got its name. They were called Christians. And this actually falls in line with something that Suetonius wrote about 14 years or so earlier, because there was a rebel Jew named Christus who was causing a lot of problems. And so if that were the case, then it would make sense that this Christus or his followers, the Christians, would have continued to cause problems, and would have been easy to affix the fault for the fire in Rome. So, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of good explanations for a lot of these things, and I think that the counter argument to Tacitus having actually written the very Christian part of this, I feel like they're very strong, because you could take the Christian part out and everything flows seamlessly, which is one of the indications that it could be an interpolation. But there's also the discrepancy with Christus and how that factors in. Like, Christus is a title, not a name. So, like, it would be weird to derive, like, a movement of people from this title in the way that Tacitus talks about. Christus being an actual name would make more sense in that particular respect. And so I feel like there's a strong argument to be made that this was an interpolation. But regardless of that, you don't even have to consider that. It only mentions that Christians were in Rome in 64 CE, and then it describes who Christians were, people that believed this crazy shit. So, I mean, that's all that it says, not evidence that Jesus existed. And I would hope that most people would be able to determine, oh, this is a 2nd century writer writing about things that happened in 64 CE, and he's not saying anything that he couldn't have gotten from the Gospels or from Christians themselves. So there's no way to determine its independence. Tacitus also doesn't tell us where he got this information from, so that's no help. But the fact that we can't identify where this information comes from means that we can't say it was independent.
Quote. Now, it should be noted here that some question if perhaps Tacitus was simply repeating something the Christians themselves were saying with no backing source elsewise. After all, it had been at this point many decades since Jesus was apparently executed. However, this notion is generally dismissed given Tacitus's preeminence as a historian and track record of having evidence to back what he said so definitively in his works, even if in many cases such evidence is lost to us today.
That's just speculative assumption right there. Like, sure, Tacitus uses sources elsewhere, and he indicates when he uses those sources, he talks about those sources. He doesn't talk about any of that here. So this would be an unfounded assumption that he's levying on this particular portion of Tacitus. And so that's not convincing to me, because you're having to assume and insert information into Tacitus's work in order for it to be independent. And who's also, just now thinking of this, who's to say that the Gospels weren't his sources that he got this from? Like, I mean, if nobody thought to question whether or not Jesus was historical, and not even the Christian church fathers cared if he was historical, I don't see why Tacitus, being a Roman and not really caring about whether or not this flock was historical or not, I don't see why he wouldn't have used the Gospels or gospel information. So, no, everything that the script just said is fallacious and is an apologetic. This is pushing theology. It's protecting a religion. That's what it's doing.
It's also noted that Tacitus's position as a senator gave him access to many official records, and perhaps most significantly of all, he was part of the Quindecimviri Sacris Fundanis, which, among other things, oversaw various foreign religious cults at the time in Rome. This suggests that Tacitus would have likely been extremely familiar with and had access to any records of Christianity that existed at that point. Thus, while the skepticism here isn't necessarily completely unwarranted, in combination with Tacitus's reputation and the other evidence at hand and how it all correlates, most historians accept this as a valid early independent source of Jesus' existence.
I mean, that's one possible explanation, but you're having to add an assumption into your conclusion here, or in order to get to your conclusion, the script's conclusion. So what he's saying here is that if we assume that he had access to these records, and if we assume that these records mention a historical Jesus, then we can assume that this was an independent source for Jesus. Do you notice how many assumptions are getting piled on here? You have to assume with no evidence to actually say, oh, this is a justified assumption. Thank you, Dexcom. This is a justified assumption. These are unjustified assumptions. Now, can you make an argument from this? Sure. This could be an explanation, but I feel like you can't definitively say that Tacitus had access to Roman records that definitely mention Jesus. Like, that's a whole line of assumptions there that are based on no evidence.
And speaking of other evidence to add to the pile, we have a rather more ironclad reference in the writings of another of the most famous historians of the period, Flavius Josephus, a man...
Oh, fuck! 2 for 2! I went into, I only watched up until about 7 minutes, and, 3 weeks ago, I had listened to, some of the rest of it. So maybe it was just a subconscious thing that I knew it. But I wasn't even really listening that time, because every time he mentions a bad source, I'm just like, fuck it, it's that again. But I couldn't remember what he brings up here, but fucking Tacitus and Josephus, fuck yeah, 2 for 2. Get fucked, script.
And born in Jerusalem almost to the year when Jesus is thought to have been crucified. Now, for those who haven't watched our video on the quite literal deadliest fart in history that resulted in the deaths of 10,000 people that Josephus documents thoroughly, a brief background is in order, as it's important as to why Josephus's taking for granted that Jesus existed is thought to be so significant. As Dr. Robert Van Voort notes, if any Jewish writer were ever in a position to know about the non-existence of Jesus, it would have been Josephus.
So I'm not sure who he's quoting right here, but this is a ridiculous sentence. Because, considering that not even the Christians were concerned with whether or not Jesus was historical, this is a ridiculous sentence. Also, the whole idea of knowing whether or not somebody existed, you have to assume, they cared, for one, like I just mentioned. 2, whether or not they'd actually be able to verify it. Now, like I said, at this time, information was limited. The access to information was fairly limited. Josephus, being that he was a Roman historian and all this other stuff, and he was also Jewish too, he had access to, information, but enough information to definitively prove that somebody didn't exist? I don't know. I feel like this is jumping a lot of logical gaps here, and I'm just not comfortable with it.
His implicit affirmation of the existence of Jesus has been, and still is, the most significant obstacle for those who argue that the extra biblical evidence is not probative on that point.
Living Pterodactyl says, are we not going to address the deadly fart? I'm assuming that, Today I Found Out has, that video on their channel, so if you want to go and check that out. It sounds interesting, but, I don't know. Go check it out if you want to, but, I'm more concerned with the bad arguments for Josephus here, that he's trying to portray as being solid arguments. I say he, and I mean the scriptwriter. The scriptwriter is trying to portray it that way.
Born in 37 AD to an extremely prominent and wealthy family in Jerusalem, Josephus' mother was a descendant of the Hasmonean dynasty, former rulers of the region, and his father was a Jewish priest. Josephus spread...
You have been blessed by Christ. Now go forth and suck my dong.
I will not suck your dong, Jesus, but thank you for the super chat.
His formative years on the Jewish side of the Jewish-Roman conflict, ultimately the head of the Jewish forces in Galilee. However, in 67 AD, after a 6-week siege of Yodfat, Josephus' siding with the Jews came to an abrupt end. Well, exactly what happened is up for debate, given Josephus' own account is primarily what we have to work with. On the 47th day, the Romans took the town, and Josephus himself and a few dozen others took refuge in some caves. Rather than be captured, they decided it was better to die, but owing to suicide being a sin, they drew lots to see who should kill and commenced with the mutual slaughter. In the end, the final survivors came down to Josephus and one other man, who decided rather than kill one another, perhaps it would be better to surrender after all. Upon doing so, Josephus ingratiated himself to the head of the Roman forces, Vespasian, by prophesying that Vespasian would become emperor of Rome. And so it was that rather than kill Josephus, Vespasian decided to take him as a slave. 2 years later, Josephus was freed when Vespasian became emperor, and he was granted Roman citizenship and more or less completely cast his lot in on the Roman side of things, including serving as an advisor and translator to Vespasian's son Titus during the 70 AD siege of Jerusalem.
Also, something to note here, which will become important here in a minute. Josephus actually thought that Vespasian was the Messiah. So, I mean, just consider that, if you will.
Of course, Josephus isn't really remembered today for any of these exploits, but rather for such things as his highly influential work, The Jewish War, which, among other things, is considered one of the best sources for information about this pivotal period of Jewish history that ultimately saw their temple destroyed and their people displaced and their lands confiscated for Roman use. Its and his other notable work, Antiquities of the Jews, also functioned as significant works in the early days of Christianity, given its description of events surrounding the era that comprised the life of Jesus of Nazareth, including accounts of prominent biblical figures such as Herod the Great, John the Baptist, and Pontius Pilate. Noteworthy in his efforts in all of this was to give an account that was impartial, unlike so many others of the era. As Josephus noted, of covering the same events, they have a mind to demonstrate the greatness of the Romans, while they still diminish and lessen the actions of the Jews. While given his Jewish heritage, you might think he'd be inclined to colour things more in their favour instead. Josephus himself noted his goal was to be impartial and that he would not go to the other extreme and will prosecute the actions of both parties with accuracy. Something, for the most part, historians generally agree he ultimately did. In any event, Josephus mentions Jesus not just once, but twice in Antiquities, written about half a century after Jesus was executed. That said, the first mention in Book 18 is generally thought to have been altered at some point in history in its details. However, most historians accept that the reference to Jesus here is still valid, just that extra details were added by some Christian scribe later and just universally copied from there.
So this is yet again another assumption. So basically, the Testimonium Flavianum, which is what he's talking about here, has some very Christian words and phrases in it that would not have been used by a Jew like Josephus. And so they assume that an earlier version of it existed that didn't have the Christian parts in it, and that a later Christian touched it up. Okay? And so that's the, partially authentic hypothesis. The problem with this hypothesis is that there's no evidence of an earlier version of it. In fact, there's no evidence of this particular section of Josephus, this one paragraph that's just sort of in there. There's no evidence of it until the 4th century. No mention of it whatsoever until the 4th century. It's almost like it just appeared. And who was the first one to actually point to it and mention it? Eusebius of Caesarea. This is a Christian father, church father, who regularly fabricated information for his own church. And he even rewrote his own church's history like 4 or 5 times. So he was not above like touching things up in order to provide an account for the historicity of his religion. This is very important because Origen does not mention this verse in Josephus, even though Origen specifically mentions Josephus and even complains about how Josephus didn't mention him. So it's really odd that Origen says this, and then working out of the same library that Origen did, there's one church father between Origen and Eusebius of Caesarea, and sometime in between there, the Josephine passage appears. Now, a lot of times people will say, well, there's a Syriac and there's a Syriac and Arabic versions that don't have the very Christianized stuff in it. But the problem is that Alice Wheely, who's a historian, has traced this document back and has identified that it through a chain of custody, that it came from Eusebius's document. So the same document that Eusebius had, that had the very Christianized parts in it, were the same ones that were used for the Arabic and Syriac versions. Now, what most likely happened was that those that wrote the Arabic and Syriac versions, they thought this is way too Christian for a Jew, and so they touched it up themselves. But the important part is that in order to say, oh, these parts were touched up, therefore there was an earlier version, that's just a hypothesis. I mean, it could be true that is the thing, but that's not what we have evidence for. What we have evidence for is that nobody mentions it, not even Origen, until the 4th century when Eusebius finds it. He finds it and mentions it. Nobody mentioned this before. And there were several people that were defending the faith before Eusebius. Are you laughing at me or something on your phone? Huh? Okay. So it's very important, this, like the whole logic of the hypothesis, because this being inserted by a later scribe is far more parsimonious with the evidence that we have. And I've got a link to a video down below, the Testimonium Flavianum video. If you want to go down there and check that out, I lay out all of the arguments against it, but basically the verb usage in this passage doesn't match what Josephus is writing. The structure of this particular passage doesn't match Josephus's writing. And it also seems to interrupt a line of thought from Josephus, being that the paragraph before Josephus is talking about one thing, and then it continues on in the paragraph after this section of Josephus that mentions Jesus. So all of the evidence points away from historical authenticity and points towards a later scribal interpolation, like a whole ass interpolation, like the entire thing was put in there, not said by Josephus. So while Josephus might be a very reliable historian, that doesn't account for later scribes that change his work.
This one it states, and on the screen the bits in brackets are the parts that were probably later added. Quote, about this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man.
Okay, yeah, he's going to read through the whole thing. We're kind of on a time crunch a little bit, so...
Things about him, and the tribe of Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not disappeared.
Which is really funny because the Christians were not tribe-sized by the time that Josephus was writing, so he definitely didn't write that.
We should probably also mention that there also exists a 10th century Arabic version of the first passage, apparently copied from some original that maintains even the seemingly modified parts, but worded in such a way that perhaps may have been closer to what the Jewish Josephus actually wrote. To quote,
no, like I explained before, this all originates from Eusebius's version. There's no version that predates it. He has to assume that there's a version predating it. Then he has to assume, well, the scriptwriter assumes that the people that wrote the Arabic. What's up, heathens? I just real quick wanted to let y'all know then he has to assume the historians or the authors that wrote the Arabic and Syriac versions, they were copying this earlier version of it. And so you just have to pile assumption upon assumption there. It just doesn't work when you have to pile assumptions on top of assumptions. That makes your hypothesis weaker.
at this time there was a wise man who was called wonders. End quote. Whatever the case on either of these, as to why elements of this are almost universally questioned here, as alluded to, Josephus was a devout advocate of Judaism. Thus, Josephus, referring to Jesus as the Christ, would seem to indicate that he was himself a convert and had, like many other Jews, accepted Jesus as the Messiah. The problem is that this doesn't really jive with other things Josephus wrote at all, or things known about him. While you might wonder then if perhaps this whole passage is a forgery, almost no historian takes that end of the extreme either, for a variety of reasons, from writing style and specific vocabulary in a large part of it, to also that the second reference, which we'll get to in a bit, seems to imply that Josephus had mentioned Jesus before in a more expansive way, so that the reader should already know who he was talking about.
This, coming from the scriptwriter, mind you, is rather baffling, because the vocabulary. There's a paper by Paul Hopper about the Testimonium Flavianum. He does an expert analysis of the vocabulary used in Josephus, and it doesn't match. And the story structure also doesn't match. Like, there's a number of things that don't match about the Testimonium Flavianum. And then you've got other historians and New Testament scholars that have analyzed this passage and show that it has weird connections to the road to Emmaus story in Luke. And so the conclusion of scholars is that it was a wholesale forgery. The conclusion is not that there's an authentic core. Like, that's the apologetic conclusion. That's not like the unbiased, non-seminary and divinity school conclusion there. So I don't understand why the scriptwriter went that direction with it, because he made it so obviously wrong. There also, with the James reference that he's probably about to bring up, in that section, it does not give any kind of indication that he's mentioned like Jesus before, or anybody that was called Christ, or explained what a Christ was. Like, it just is not representative of how Josephus refers back to some group or individual that he's already mentioned. It's starkly different from that. And I guess he's going to get into that here in a second, and then we're going to end on the James reference, I guess.
Had the more expansive text not existed originally at all, the second reference would have required more context. Further, the second reference appears to have no such modification and simply uses Jesus as a reference to clarify who someone else was. Naturally, because of the apparent modification of some sort, this first reference can't be taken at face value on the details. However, when discussing it as an early reference that Jesus did in fact exist at least, most historians accept that much about it. As the second reference, the context of this one in Book 20 is rather long, and an aside too far if fully quoted, but the important part is embedded in an account of an event in which a new high priest decided to take advantage of the fact that the Roman procurator Albinus was out of town and have executed some individuals that he didn't like. To quote, "So he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others." End quote. Unfortunately for the high priest, Albinus got word of this abuse of power and subsequently stripped the position of high priest away, and instead gave the high priesthood to, funnily enough, a guy also named Jesus, but a different Jesus, son of Damnius. On this
Right, the son of Damnius, which he doesn't explain who this son of Damnius is, or why he's there, why he was picked. He doesn't explain any of that. Whereas, being a common custom at the time, the person that was executed, their position would be filled by like a next of kin or somebody related to them. And that was a way of like repaying them for the wrong that had happened. Like, it was restitution. That's how it was seen. Now, if you'll notice, it has the Sanhedrin was called so that they could execute James, right? Who was himself like in a high priest position. The James that's supposedly the brother of the Lord is, for one thing, was not in a high priest position, and for two, he wouldn't have classified himself necessarily as a Jew at this point. I don't think. I mean, he was obviously following Jesus. Maybe he would have considered himself a Jew, so maybe he would have, been subjected to the Sanhedrin or whatever. But the fact is that who was called Christ is very similar to a marginal note, and in grammar and structure and all that kind of stuff. So it could have been inserted later. One thing that the counter argument to this is that there was some kind of reference there to James being a Ben Damnius and being a brother to this Jesus. And so later on in the passage, when they say, oh, hey, this Jesus Ben Damnius is being put in James's position because he was unlawfully killed. And so in as far as like story structure goes and everything like that flows fine. But as it stands now, it's like, oh, there's this dude named James, the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ. And at that point, the Gentile audience that's reading this is like, wait, what the fuck? The fuck is a Christ? Like, they wouldn't have known the significance of Christ, what that meant, or anything like that. So Josephus would have had to make a reference back to the book 18, right? He would have had to say something to tell them, oh, hey, look back here, and that's who this guy was, right? But they don't do that. It mentions he was called Christ, who was called Christ, but it doesn't tell us what a Christ is. And he doesn't give us any kind of reference back to explaining what a Christ is. So there's a problem there that the script claims is explained, but it actually isn't. And then he just blows right past the fact that a completely different Jesus is put into the spot of James. Like, that makes no sense as far as like a story and plot goes. Like, flowing James was killed. He had a brother named Jesus who was called the Christ. Blah 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 blah. Fuck this dude that killed him. Blah blah blah. Oh, let's pull a random fucking Jesus named Ben Damnius out of the fucking air and put him in the high priest position as if that means something. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, Josephus actually mentions 12 total men named Jesus. Again, it was a common name in the region. As an interesting little brief aside, as alluded to, Josephus also is one of the early independent sources for the existence of John the Baptist, noting, quote, now some of the Jews thought that...
Okay, well, he's going to continue on explaining it. He claims that this is independent evidence of Jesus. It's most likely not. It's most likely an interpolation. Same thing with the first reference in Josephus. But it's quite interesting that he only discusses these two, but that's all that we have time for tonight, because I still have a few comments to read from the Skeptic Mafia. And I guess either we can continue this. I don't know if I'll be able to continue it next week. I'm not sure if there's going to be a live stream next week. Probably not. And then we'll continue on in November with some with live streams. So if this is the last live stream of the month, I appreciate you guys being here. Yeah, it's been 2 hours. It's crazy long. But all in all, the evidence that he presented was Tacitus and Josephus. Neither of them are independent sources, and neither of them actually reference a historical Jesus. So those two pieces of evidence are not convincing for me, at least, as well as other mythicists, because they're not actually references to a historical Jesus as far as we can tell. So I don't know why the scriptwriter chose to go with a more apologetic route, because this defense that we've been hearing tonight is a religious defense. Like, it's an apologetic in order to save the Christian faith from its ahistoricity, right? All of it's been apologetic nonsense, not rooted in actual good scholarship. It's rooted in seminary and divinity scholarship. You know, like those papers that you get from somebody, and it's like, oh, this is from a seminary school, and it attests to how the earth was flooded with a global flood. It's like, are you fucking serious right now? This is not secular or objective, you dipshit. It's the same thing here. This is an apologetic that's meant to protect Jesus, to stand for Jesus, and will never be convinced by that kind of argument. So try again later there, scriptwriter. Anyways, I hope that you heathens had a good time tonight. I know I did. And if you will, please go down below and let me know what you thought about tonight's video. I'd be very interested to hear your criticisms and critiques of my analysis of the evidence presented by the scriptwriter for today. I found out. Let me know down below. And while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens. But wait, don't go, because we got some Skeptic Mafia comments to get to. Make sure I got the latest and the newest. I do. I do want to remind, if there's any Skeptic Mafia members that are here right now, that If there's any Skeptic Mafia, if there are any Skeptic Mafia members here right now, we will be having a hangout tomorrow at 3 p.m. And we will be hanging out then. You'll see a link here posted on the community tab for you to join. So I hope that you guys will. Ninjester says, I love how more... Oh, wait. None. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on right now. I love how none of these pieces of evidence amount to a single first-person account. It just seems like someone would have noticed reports of a guy running around with swaths of people following him and declaring that he was destined to overthrow Roman authority in Israel. Well, see, that's the weird thing. Like, he wasn't even talking about the Roman authority. Like, he was talking about the powers and principalities. That's what Paul says, at least, that Jesus was more concerned with overthrowing the devil rather than the Romans. Also, if he was, going to overthrow Roman authority, it wouldn't make sense for Jesus to talk about, like paying your taxes and all this other stuff, like render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's and everything like that. What Jesus was preaching about, like from Paul and from all that, which I know I'm harping a little hard on this particular point, but it is a point that's regularly mentioned by like historicists and everything, that, Jesus was looking to overthrow the Romans or something like that. Jesus was more concerned about overthrowing Satan. Like that was his demon, or not demon, but his adversary. It's always been his adversary. It's never been the Romans. Jesus hasn't given two fucks about the Romans. It's always been Satan. Next up is Space Tomato 69. It says, I'm busy playing a TTRPG currently, so I'm unable to watch, but I'm sure you'll debunk it much better than I could have ever tried at an attempt. Besides, I don't want to keep you reading for too long, so here's my ASCII sacrifice for tonight. Ah, shit. I gotta zoom out a little bit. Oh, fuck yeah, Buff Kirby. See what? Yeah. Are you laughing at me now or your phone? Okay. It's Buff Kirby because Buff Kirby don't give no fucks. And if you don't want to give a single fuck, go ahead and like this video. Heck, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. And while you're at it, and remember the mantra, Casey is always right. I will listen to KC. I will always follow KC's recommendations. KC is God. Eat your goddamn fruits and veggies and drink some fucking water, you heathen. I've got this. It's ocean water. It's a Sonic like little flavor packet, and it tastes like coconut and tropical shit. It is very good. And then to Drew's book review says, hard evidence? No, I don't think so. But I'm sure GE will do a good job explaining why there is. Oops, I mean, isn't hard evidence. I mean, yeah, it definitely was flaccid evidence. It's very flaccid, if I had to describe it in any kind of way. That was the Skeptic Mafia comment, so I really appreciate everybody who commented tonight. I know that this was a repeat, so a lot of people didn't have a lot more to say. But I do appreciate you guys being here. I feel like I'm probably going to stream some gameplay tomorrow at some point, probably in the morning. I don't have that set up yet, but I'll get it set up. I'm playing Resident Evil 4 right now, trying to make my way through that. I'm also playing Mirage, but I won't play that tomorrow morning. Trying to stay hyper-focused on like one game so I can finish it. But in any case, going to be doing that. And then we got a hangout tomorrow afternoon. And then next week, I do have some videos prepared. I got one discussion with a really crazy fucking dude. And then I've got a video. It's responding to a Muslim philosopher. So I hope that you guys will enjoy that. And I guess I will see you heathens later. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.